Morning, everybody. Welcome to the second day of the hearing stream number 5 for the Central Hawke's Bay proposed district plan. The topic for hearing stream 5 is a pretty broad one, covering hazards and risks, earthwork and subdivision in general. Today's schedule of appearances, a mixture of online and in person primarily. Before we start, I would just say that if everyone can make sure their phones are on silent, thank you. We would like to welcome our first submitter to take a seat, please. Thank you. Nakwe.
Kia ora.
Do you know most of the hearing panel? I could be Loretta Lovell on the left, Commissioner Tim Atkin and Kate Taylor there, and the reporting planners are back there, the authors of the section 42. So we are on Zoom as well, and it's all recorded and online. And I know we have seen you virtually before. You're feeling better now these days? Because
Yes.
you were being safe, playing safe, weren't you? You went too well.
No, I got worse.
So welcome. We have read the original submission, but really we're open to hearing, the key points you'd like to make today. Got some speaking notes, it's even better.
Yes. Sorry, just pulled it together yesterday, so I wouldn't have time to email it in.
Right.
I did bring copies.
It's not like it's 100 pages, so that's good.
So can I start?
Yes, certainly. I think this is all right.
Kia ora koutou. Called Stella England, and I'm here today on behalf of the Kairaka Lands Trust. Thank you for having me, and I'd like to acknowledge the commissioners for the dedication to Te Taiao and mihi te Alex and her team here at the hospital. We've just had 2 days of wānanga for the hearing stream 4 matters. And I found that very valuable and was grateful to be a part of it. I really appreciated the chance to sit down together and to share our feelings, thoughts and experiences and to increase our knowledge and understanding of the various matters and move forward. So thank you for the opportunity. Today I will discuss the following submission points. I noted from the first hearing how useful examples were, so I've endeavoured to illustrate my points today with examples. Page 2, subdivision. Just for clarity, when I talk about subdivision, it may not be the definitions you're used to, so I thought I'd just put it out there what I mean. I'm talking about, creating separate parcels of land, for example, for lifestyle blocks, house sections, farm parks, commercial operations and housing development. When I talk about development, I'm talking about improving conditions, and it's in a really broad sense. So for example, in farming, this could refer to activities to increase production, such as ploughing paddocks, or it could mean just improving services such as roading. When I talk about changing land use, I mean change from how it's currently used to different use and purpose, and we all know this is happening rapidly. The SASM schedule in the proposed district plan has very few cultural sites listed, and therefore in its current state has little value. As a result of this, the proposed district plan should take an extremely thoughtful approach in relation to put on cultural and historic sites. The current provisions and processes are not protecting our cultural sites and landscapes. We submit that the PDP should require the that the New Zealand Archaeological Association site recording scheme or ArcSite should be checked in all instances within a subdivision, a development, or a change of land uses is occurring. This will ensure that the recorded archaeological sites are identified. We submit a cultural impact assessment should take place when a subdivision or a development or change of land use occurs within 100 meters of a recorded archaeological site. So there was an example of some forestation work went on a neighbouring farm, and there were some sites that were recorded, but because of the history of the area, we expected that there were many other unrecorded sites. So the farm employed SPAR, which is a part of the University of Otago, the South Pacific Archaeological Research Unit, to do an archaeological survey of the whole farm, and they identified the sites and the blocks that were going to be afforested. They put a buffer around those sites so that they weren't planted. Yeah, that was just for the blocks that they afforested. Then they subsequently did an archaeological survey of the remainder of the farm that's still in farming, and through that process over 50 new sites were identified, and those are some of those included many archaeological features. So it's a really good example of how many sites can be in those areas that were heavily occupied by Māori. Through that process, we were able to work with the farm and the farmer to agree on some results that benefited both Tangata Whenua and the farmer. Earthworks were able to be rerouted in a sense. There was a power on there, and they wanted to plant the paddock that the power was in. We had concerns that the power was on the skyline, and it is somewhere that for that point, somewhere where we always looked. It's very distinctive, it's very iconic, and so we just asked that they not plant right up to the skyline, that they lower their planting height so that we could still have that that point to look to our pa. And the benefit of this is that those unrecorded sites were also found through that process. There was also another example where there was a recorded site, and a farmer was grubbing thistles in his paddock, and he while removing a thistle on a exposed face of he came across human remains. It was quite distinctly one human skull, and the recorded site was just recorded as pits and terraces. So it's not really somewhere where you would expect human remains to be found. So he contacted the appropriate channels, police, Tangata Whenua and Heritage New Zealand, and those remains turned out to be the remains of two people. It was a secondary burial, so they'd been buried or treated beforehand and then moved to this place, and then subsequently had been exposed through a little bit of erosion and then grubbing thistles. So those remains were removed and then buried close to the site, but in a more secure location. And then about 2 years later, the farmer, they were subdividing the homestead. And because that recorded site was there, and I should say the farm manager moved on. So the farm manager knew where this new site was, but obviously the owners didn't. And then the owners subdivided because it was a recorded site and it was close to where the subdivision was occurring. We were notified, and so we met on site, looked at the site, looked at where the iwi was, and the original boundary for the subdivision had the iwi being sold with the homestead. And the solution that we came up with was just moving the fence line so that the iwi stayed with the farm and the owners. So for us, cultural impact assessments are about finding a solution that suits everybody, so that we have the chance to have a conversation and we can express our views and then come to a level of understanding. I think it's all of 2.3.2. 2.33, we think a cultural impact assessment should take place within an area of known Māori occupation. And a good example is a housing development that's going on at Porirere. No recorded sites have been recorded in the area that is to be developed, but in the wider Porirere area, there's only 9 recorded sites. And we know this area was occupied by Māori up to and after European settlement. So we expect that there are many unrecorded sites there. And in this instance, an archaeological assessment and a cultural impact assessment are being done. And again, hopefully that's to minimise the effects of that housing development on our cultural and historic heritage. And just, I'll put EG water upgrade there, but that needs to be over the page, the 2.3.4. Sorry, that's a bit of a mistake. So page 3. There is increasing housing development in the rural environment. We propose that house sites should be checked by an archaeologist when they are within 100 metres of a recorded archaeological site or a known cultural landscape. And there is a really good example of a house, not in this district, in the Hastings district. It's the picture that was in our submission. And it shows a home and it's in a beautiful location, but right behind it on the hill are stone rows for Māori gardens. And I think the important thing about that site is that we don't have many examples in Central Hawke's Bay of Māori gardening, and we actually have a few sites in Hawke's Bay, good examples of Māori gardening, and it's about the rarity of that site and how unique it is, which is what makes it really special. In that instance, we think it should be common practice for people planning to build house to undertake archaeological assessments as they would, for example, a geotech report. yeah. We know that there's increasing demand for housing in the rural environment, and it's just going to keep putting more and more pressure on our archaeological sites and our culture and our history. An archaeological authority from Heritage New Zealand may be required if there is the possibility of archaeology, like for example with the proposed house site. But this process doesn't prevent a house from being built. It doesn't always prevent a house from being built. And authority means that if there is archaeology, it is recorded and that any potential information from that site is not lost or ignored. And we do have some examples. I know of 2 examples where house sites and driveways are impinging, getting really close to cultural landscapes. And in those circumstances, the developer or the landowner is opting to get an excavator, a digger in to pre-turf where they want to put the house site. So just to take the top 5 to 10 centimeters off where the house is going to be, so that we can tell whether or not there's archaeology there. If there is archaeology, they've got the option of moving that before they start doing any significant work. Yeah, so two examples of that. Which is, may not be, which is a win-win for all. An accidental discovery protocol should be used in instances only when there's a low chance of archaeology. A thorough archaeological survey of the entire district would provide some certainty about the location of archaeological sites for future planning and development. A cultural overlay or a polygon is part of a GIS layer, which could include site information. And this information from an archaeological survey could be used to identify sites where exact locations of systems did not want to be disclosed for various reasons. That overlay or that polygon would just advise who to talk to and their contact information. Doesn't need to be a large area. It can just be a general. There is one example of a farm that we know of where there was a koiwi found, and in that instance it was just reburied because it could be, and it's where it was. So we have just located or put a big circle around that area and kind of said to the farm owners that's a wāhi tapu, and that we would advise that, not much happened there. Yeah. And the area probably was about 120 meters diameter around the site. Yeah. So, and we would not support any subdivision development or a change in land use to wāhi tapu. So by wāhi tapu, I mean those sites or areas that are spiritual, that are revered, that are sacred to tangata whenua, such as Urupā, pā, because a lot of the times they have koiwi tangata on them. Tuahu, which are altars or places where tohunga undertook special rituals, and or battle sites. Page 4. Our submission for earthworks. Our submission was concerned that there were no specific objectives or policies relating to ensuring that cultural sites were protected from earthworks and the earthworks component of the plan. The section 42 report advised this issue was addressed by other parts of the PDP, such as the SASM chapter. We submit that cultural and historic sites should be mentioned, and those other relevant sections of the PDP should be referred to here, so that this earthwork section is not read in isolation of those other parts of the plan. We also ask that council employ earthworks contractors who have had sufficient training or a certain level of competency regarding recognising SASMs. The section 2 report stated that this was a matter of operational policy for council and not something to be achieved through the plan. And we accept this position, but we would like to stress that this is one way that council operationally can start to change the colonial mindset. Some damage really is just unnecessary and it's completely avoidable. And yeah, there have been examples where terraces have been cut through for farm tracks and water tables, and every time those water tables are cleared, a little more of those sites gets damaged. Yeah. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Helen. Any questions?
Yeah, hi, I've got a couple. And 2.3.4, when you talked about the house by the garden rows, and that sort of thing, you mentioned 100 meters in there, and when you talked about the Waihi Tapu around the Koiwi, you said it was 120.
Yeah.
Any reason why 100? What basis should we use to formulate what that distance would or should be?
So the 120 meters around the Koiwi was just kind of a general size of the area that we put the circle around the site. I think with the cultural sites, they use the whole landscape. They didn't just use one area and then use another area. So if we're going to find stuff, it doesn't need, but they use the whole landscape. So yeah, it's just.
The 100 meters was from the recorded archaeological site. So is there any reason why, I get what you mean about the depends on each case.
It probably could be larger in some instances, and it probably could be smaller in some instances, because a lot of the information in ArcSite is not expert either. Another good point that sometimes they can be like 300 meters out from where the star is on the map. It's just a stab in the dark. Hopefully we picked up some of those sites and stopped some of those sites from being damaged. Yeah.
You mentioned the cultural overlay, which we discussed in the last hearing that you took part in. And then also in here you talk about the colonial mindset. There's a real mistrust there still. How do you think council can continue to improve this relationship so that we actually get that trust to put something like that, to know those undisclosed locations?
So in this example here with council using approved operators, it just kind of says that council is supportive of doing all that we council can to prevent further damage of sites. And there is a real colonial mindset out there about people not liking being told that they can or cannot do something on their land. And you know, it is a fair point in some respects, but in the other respect, like it's a part of our history. It's a part of being a part of New Zealand. It's a part of New Zealand's past. It's yeah, and I think there's so much that we don't know about our history as well, especially Central Hawke's Bay. Hawke's Bay's a little bit better, but yeah, I think of places like Egypt, other places around the world when they have such a long history, and then it's embraced. You know, I'm not sure that we fully embrace our history here. Not all of it yet. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, we've had over the past few weeks a conversation around what is cultural sites of significance for Maori. And I notice here your Europa, Pa, and battle sites, etc. But my concern is for landowners, and this is for all landowners, that we buy a bit of land and we want to build a house on it or something, and someone comes along and says, "Oh, that's a site of significance for some reason," and I feel that how do we protect those landowners that do that when they do all the right things, and then they suddenly get this, they've done all their homework, they've looked at all the, they looked at the certificates, made sure there's not any area of significance on that land, and then suddenly told they are. How do we protect that from not degrading those sites' significance accidentally, even though they, and what I'm saying is, can we not get plans, or in part of the district plan, have those sites more registered, and Maori can come out and register those sites, because I don't think anyone wants to degrade a Europa or anything like that. There's no one out there wants to do it on purpose. They do it accidentally most of the time. And I think the Pa sites are exactly the same. And it's also, where do we draw the line of what is significant and what is not? So if someone had a hut there on that ridge, is that significant, or is that just happened to be there was a hut there and it's registered that it was?
I'm kind of sitting here wishing I have a pen, because there's so many things
I know.
in your
sorry.
question that I need to answer.
I'll give you a pen.
It's been going around my mind this right from when we first started the district plan. It's been top of my mind, and how do we protect these sites for people? Because I don't think anyone, whether it's a colonial or not, wants to degrade them on purpose.
We did spend a lot of time during the wānanga talking about the definition of wāhi tapu and why there are different terms, wāhi tapu, wāhi taonga, wāhi tūpuna. And there was a distinction made between wāhi tapu and the other terms. So as I mentioned there, wāhi tapu are those really spiritual urupa, Pa, and Pa is included there because once Māori moved away from living in Pa, they when they did pass on afterwards, this is like 18th century, then they tended to be reburied back on the Pa. So there's quite a lot of burials on Pa now, when traditionally, no, I won't say they didn't used to be, because they did used to be buried on Pa. earlier on too. So the myself personally, I use the word wāhi taonga, especially when I know I'm talking about a site that isn't tapu. And perimeter pits, for example, are a good example. They're definitely not tapu. Fire pits, midden, they're not tapu. Unless there are people buried in them, sometimes there are. There's always exceptions, I believe. But so that's a good distinction. And if you are going through the archaeological authority process, say you're applying to build a house and it's in a cultural landscape and you have to apply for an authority, it doesn't mean that you're not going to get to build your house. It just means that there may be conditions such as pre-turfing where you want to put your house site. It doesn't, especially if it's a wāhi taonga. So, you know, Heritage New Zealand doesn't turn down archaeological authorities often. So there's, yeah. I know of one example up in the back of Hastings where a development is proposed and it's on a par. Yeah. Yeah, they're going to pre-turf it to make sure that they're not building on something.
So just to follow up on that.
Yeah, because I don't think I've answered all parts. of the
No, you
question.
It's good. My conversation, what I'm trying to get is that wāhi tapu, I think that's quite a clear distinction, even in my mind, what that means. And then what's the rest? So if we find a fire pit, for example, is that enough to stop the building being built there?
No, so I know of an example in Waimarama where they were doing a driveway. They had an authority because it was in a landscape, an archaeological cultural landscape. And there was a fire pit in the driveway. And so the archaeologist was just called, sampled the fire pit dimensions, that kind of stuff. And then it just proceeded. But an archaeological survey of the district would help you it would help us to get more sites registered and included in the schedule and included in ArcSite, which would give people more security around the department and CHB.
I just on those surveys many years ago when I first got a pilot's license, I used to take Pat Parsons around Hawke's Bay looking for power sites in an aeroplane.
He's quite fond of drones now because he can.
Drones would be a lot easier. There
Doesn't
wasn't
need to sit in
drones
a plane with Tim.
Yeah.
But I remember flying around all through Karaka and all through that area and everywhere looking for power sites. So there has been quite a bit of work done.
Yes, but did it make it into, you know,
But this is,
plan schedule and to,
this is the point I'm trying to get is that can I say this, that I'd rather see it in the plan and on the maps. So we all know. And if it is a tapu site that maybe I've heard that they don't want it registered for some reason, and that's fine. But maybe we can have a record sitting in the back somewhere that if someone buys the land, they just get a little red flag flicks up to show that there might be something there and they need to do a bit more homework.
and I think there's probably more of a start of a shift and Māori perspective about reporting sites. Obviously there are those sites where, I mean, I know that I wouldn't identify a specific location, I'd do a polygon area around it. But then there are other sites where I see the value in people knowing that it's there because it's an hopefully another way to protect it. And I think for older Māori, that mindset is starting to change as well. Because, you know, traditionally they were just like, no, that's ours. You know, you tell who you need to tell, and then that information was passed on that way. But now I think there's an acceptance that we need to be a bit more broader, wider, inclusive, in the hope of achieving some kind of protection for our cultural history. Big question, that one.
So just on your paragraph 2.3.3. When we talk about an archaeological assessment of CIA have been done in this instance. Who required it? Was it the council? Was it the company doing the subdivision?
This is at Porirere.
Yeah. What was the mechanism by which this was started?
Yes, I think in this instance, council asked if tangata whenua had been consulted. And through that process, maybe the archaeologist was involved as well.
We have had evidence, as you know, suggesting cultural impact assessments on all consents, which is possibly a bit unwieldy. And I do take the point that you suggested more of the process in terms of checking with an archaeologist when they are within 100 metres of a reported archaeological site. So just picking up on.
And it's around earthworks. It's around when what they're wanting to do involves earthworks.
Yeah, that was one of the questions I was going to ask. I guess for me, I'm trying to understand the process. I'm trying to understand what's the best process, and I'm taking up the point about the maps. So if we have a map, as you say, a map site, 100 metres, an archaeological assessment should be required with respect to earthworks, subdivision, sort of thing. But I'm also mindful of the unrecorded sites. We've got this at the moment where, as you say, the archaeological site recording is not accurate, our maps are not accurate, you know, and people are not going to wait until they are. So how do we fill that gap? What do we need to do from a process point of view to provide some protection if we can? And so for me, it comes back to, okay, where it's recorded, the process was probably easier to understand because it's something that we can identify. Here it is. Where it's not recorded, then we are left with impact assessments, archaeological reports, when those might be required, and how do we trigger those, or do we trigger those, and then ultimately accidental discovery where something's found, all of which is left very much on, if we don't have a mechanism, left on the poor bulldozer digger who's got to remember or work out what he's digging, the landowner who doesn't know, and hopefully the council if they get told. There's a lot of uncertainty there. So for me, in terms of process, I'm trying to understand, is there anything we can do through the plan that can actually reduce some of that and sites until we can get a systematic process in place. So taking your point on board, actually work for an example, you tell me you think. Does that work? So
I really, I want to say that I don't know the answer either, and I'm just you know, I'm just trying to share the experiences that I've had.
And I pick up on that, which is why I'm sort of trying to tailor it to what we need to know to see if we can't have some thinking around that. And I'm probably the one who's probably already had a conversation about it, but just since I've got you here. So for example, if we have an earthwork, it's not near a reported site, but you have a sense that there may be sites there. In that instance, what would you see as the trigger? If it's earthworks or if it's subdivision, would you say that there should be a cultural impact assessment? And that would be difficult when you think about earthworks can be as small as lifting a hole. So. Yeah. And can there be a trigger? This is the question.
I think the amount of earthworks, the volume. And then if it's in a cultural landscape.
It's just when we don't even have that, because I think I have a comfort that when we've got identified cultural landscape in some way, shape or form, there's probably a process that we can identify. So just to tailor it down, it's more in the gap, which is the unrecorded sites. So just to sort of tailor it down, because I think we've probably we can find a way with the ones with sites identified between the corridor with Thomas Whenua and Heritage New Zealand. I think there's thing I get the sense of conversation around what's
If this was in my backyard on my whenua, I personally wouldn't care if I had people ringing me up each week saying, can you come with this? Because for me, I would rather that I waste my time and know that it's not going to affect something than something being inadvertently. And I think that, you know, hopefully that would just be a filler until we do have archaeological surveys done, a good spatial GIS tool developed. Yeah.
and then I guess coming down, your assumption being that where a consent is required. I mean, often we've got lots of places in earthworks where a consent is not required, or a consent is required, or even where consent is required, education, which is not, but education to so that people know that if something's identified, this is the process. So for example, the consent probably already does it now. Accidental discovery should be taken by just to give them a notice. Is that something you would see as appropriate for unreported sites?
So there was an example we had, there was a subdivision at Kairako and an excavation took place because they knew that there was archaeology there. The subdivision still proceeded and the individual house lots were sold. And somewhere in the process, it got lost that they had to build the houses like not dig down. They couldn't, I don't know. So it turned out that one of these sections did do that, took the topsoil off down to the hard stuff and then built. But in that process, they were going through midden and yeah, I don't know what else was then. Yeah, it was. Yeah, and so that should have been noted on the on the, yeah, like, you know, I don't know.
It's okay.
Well, like, I don't know enough about that process to know if it would work.
No, it's fine. I mean, we appreciate the examples. The examples really help us to sort of clarify our minds in terms of how we go forward. I don't have any other questions.
I just got one, and that's to follow up. Loretta's just asked as well, because you do use that term cultural landscapes, known cultural landscapes, and I'm just wondering whether there's any potential in that for knowing what kind of markers would indicate that it's cultural landscape, because not necessarily every flat part of the Ruataniwha Plains would be. There'll be certain markers that would indicate this is a possible cultural landscape, and I was thinking it's probably outside our scope to do that now, but in terms of the way forward, to say, well, as I hate to use the term quick and dirty, but a faster way of trying to get something in the plan. There would be a process for sort of mapping the district where there are cultural markers.
Yeah, so it would be something that you would need to do with each hapu or marae. But I know for our area, I could quite easily draw on a map, Google Earth, the area that I see as the cultural landscape. Because it pretty much follows the coast down Te Apiri Valley from Waimarama, along the valley out to the coast, along Mangakuri River to Porere. So it was quite a, it was where they walked, it was where they travelled. So, and it was restricted to the coast. So, you know, I could easily identify that area as for our, you know,
Just looking at a map of the area, just to make sure I'm following you. Thank you. That's all the questions I have. Any other questions? Thank you very, very much, and coming in person too, because it's always useful. Thank you for your time and effort.
forgiving me. I think I'll see you next time.
Well, that'd be great.
That's fine.
So thank you very much to Craig and Gavin for being patient. All right.
Yep, no problem.
Hear us okay?
Yep, I can hear you fine.
Yeah. Okay, so we have read your statements of evidence that were pre-circulated. Thank you very much. I'll just quickly turn to them in my folder. So we're really, the floor is open to you to sort of talk to the main points of your evidence. I don't know, I don't know that was anything from yesterday's opening remarks from the plan for the council. Seems to be corrected, but there was a little bit of discussion yesterday with Kāinga Ora about the whole issue of whether flood hazard maps should be in the district plan or outside the district plan, and the virus of the lawfulness of having rules in the plan referring to the plans or maps outside the plan and all that. So we're getting some further information on that. But we are very interested in hearing what you have to say on this topic. So, and anything else that was the submission covered. So over to you. Who would like to kickstart?
Let's lead off with Craig and his brief summary.
Okay, sure, no problem. As you say, you've taken it as read. Probably the biggest thing is that the maps in the existing district plan were old, not fit for purpose. We needed to update something. We've done the hazard mapping now in the interim. We'll be, in the next few years, we'll be updating it with better technology and better data. So now it's a matter of, I think the biggest question, as you stated, was, should they be in the district plan or not? And, we might have an opinion on it, that it gives better effect to enforcing the hazards, but then it reduces flexibility of change. So there's good and bad both ways, but quite happy to take advice on either way. But our opinion is that the maps are suitable based on the effort and data available, the effort that went into it. They will be updated as time goes on. Yeah, that's probably about, and there's limitations, I guess I stated those. Actually, I will state too, is like they were just used in a subdivision application very effectively to prevent some potential houses in risky areas, and the applicant changed their subdivision application. I think it works quite well. So it's they're being effective at the moment. Okay, that's probably enough for me.
Was that in Central Hawke's Bay or Hastings or somewhere?
No, that was in Central Hawke's Bay. Yeah.
Okay, I might just ask for Gavin to just maybe talk to his evidence very briefly, and then we'll just open it up to questions.
Yep, that sounds sensible. Thank you, Chair. Morena koutou. So my evidence here really does focus in on the natural hazards and climate change topic. There's a couple of things in here around our submission points that the officer has recommended to be accepted. Great, but what I'll focus on in our few minutes with you this morning is whether or not new updated flood hazard information should be included in the district plan, and if so, what? And what do you do about it? So my evidence is that the flood hazard mapping work that Craig has done is far superior than what was in the operative district plan, and better than what was in the proposed plan as notified. Craig has taken it a step further and potentially given you the opportunity to not just have one generic flood hazard zone map, but have two subzones within that. As a planner, my opinion is the mapping is sound. It's commensurate with the, as Craig said, the effort that has gone into it, the data currently available. The planning response to that information is fundamentally with you. Are there activities, land use activities and subdivision activities occurring within the district that warrant some extra regulatory response over and above things such as what the Building Act, Building Code trigger? And if there is an extra regulatory response necessary and appropriate, that is for the district plan to step in and include some provisions for that.
Mm-hmm.
The flood mapping zones 1 and 2 present an opportunity for some differentiation between the types of risk and the types of land use activities occurring within those two different zones. So it's my opinion that as a package, the new flood mapping work that Craig has done and presented in the Regional Council submission is better than what's in the proposed plan. And it presents an opportunity for your rules in the district plan to be even better fit for purpose than what was at notification. And I see many of those rules in the district plan are geared around your BIC categories, building categories. To me, that is a sensible approach. And it looks like the reporting officer is recommending that approach continue. And the reporting officer has recommended pretty much most of our submission points are accepted on these matters. Turning slightly away from the flood hazard mapping side of things, I did want to draw your attention to another submission point that the regional council made around tsunami mapping extents.
Mhm.
And it looks like in the reporting officer's work, she is recommending that the regional council submission point is to be accepted. But in my evidence at paragraph 3.3, it just seems to be a little bit of ambiguity as to whether there are or aren't to be any amendments made as a consequence of accepting that submission to your district plan. So it'd be just nice to square that one away. Clarify, in fact, if you were to accept updated tsunami extent mapping work, well then surely there ought to be some amendments to the district plan, contrary to what the reporting office paper had identified at that point. Just briefly on Kāinga Ora's submissions and evidence. There is, and certainly is already, the ability for the Hawke's Bay Hazards Information Portal to be a place for people to go and get informed about types of hazards present in Hawke's Bay on a particular property in a particular place. That is all it really is, it's information. But if you want a regulatory response to do something with that natural hazard information, I circle back to my earlier point. The district plan is one such instrument that you can deliver on that regulatory response over and above what your building code, building act responsibilities may offer. And just in wrapping up, put it beyond doubt, our submission did touch on some of the other subdivision type matters that are before you in hearing stream number 5. Our evidence hasn't sort of gone into those matters because the way the reporting officer has addressed them, we're entirely confident with that approach.
Right, thank you. Are you open to questions from the panel?
We are, yes.
Any questions? Yeah.
You talked about the LiDAR work you've done. When would that be available to be able to, and I know it's mainly on where the water is, but it's also got land contour and everything else, I assume is correct, making a selection. When would that information be available that we could put into our maps so we can see the flooding and everything else and be much more accurate around it?
So the new LiDAR data has been collected, is being processed, and in some areas like around Waipawa, Waipukurau, Lake Hatuma, it is available. We are using it, but it's not a total data set yet. So we haven't gone that next step to say, well, now that we have better ground elevation data, we will do computer modeling of the flood control systems or the flood extents. If I'm not sure if you're asking when we would use the data and update the maps to be more accurate, is that what you're after?
Yeah, that is it. We had this data, we've been waiting now for a long time for it. We were told we had it at the beginning of this year. I'm just wondering where that data would be available that we could include it in the mapping.
I would suggest it's still in the years away to be complete, yet we do isolated things like we've done Makara, Ellsthorpe, we've done Onga Onga. So we can update small areas that are probably a little bit more prevalent quicker, but for a widespread coverage of the whole area, I think it's still years away based on resources available. That being said, putting pressure on our council to hurry it up is a possibility that we could put more resources to it. I'm just basing this on the available resources that I see in front of me right now, which is my chance. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Just in your evidence, you said that the information, may overlap with, that previous question. That the flood mapping information, Craig, is going to be updated later this year. Is that still on track or?
No, the data is going to be made available this year, the LiDAR data, the ground contours. So that's not the flood mapping won't occur until, as I just described. Yeah.
Yeah, just to clarify, Gavin, and so it's your professional opinion that it's preferable to have the maps inside the district plan rather than outside and as occurs in Auckland?
Yeah, my understanding is you could have maps outside of the district plan that serve an information only purpose. But in order for a regulatory response to be triggered inside of using a district plan rule, surely that rule is then reliant on what's featured in the district plan maps. It's a little bit dodgy, unclear as to whether a district plan rule can cross-reference to an external piece of material that could change from one week to the next. Hey, if Auckland Council has navigated the legalese and ins and outs of that and has come to a sound legal basis, great. I'm not convinced of that yet.
Well, one thing I haven't got my head around is Kaingor and questioning them yesterday, the plan change 27 in Tauranga, which did take that approach, the AUP approach, has been taken to appeal to the Environment Court, and they got a legal opinion from Simpson Grierson to explain why it's virus approaches that the outside maps, should we call them, are used to inform the assessments. They're not there to inform whether you need consent or not, you know, whether you do or don't need consent. They're there to inform the assessments. Now, I haven't got my head around how that works, and we are being sent a copy of that legal opinion, that legal advice, to hopefully will clarify that for us a bit more. Because I take your point, Gavin, around what you just said. So yes, we'll stay tuned. We're still to find out.
Yeah, as you described it, Chair, that does make a bit more sense in my mind. If you've got a consent application in front of you for some reason, your assessment criteria might open the door to looking at hazard information and heritage and various other things. That's all cool.
Yeah.
But if you've got rules in your district plan that are permitted and need a consent on the basis of whether you're in a hazard zone or not, surely that hazard zone should be met in that district plan itself.
Okay, thank you, Gavin. Any more questions from the panel?
Just to follow up, just to reiterate or follow on our chair. So when you say, so it's better to have the maps inside the camp, as it were, which also manages the risk of the external maps being changed. This is the process that's required to change anything within a plan process. Would you say that is also because as part of a mapping within a plan process, there is the requirement for a reasonable amount of consultation and engagement with the community to get some point of including or excluding within a map? Is that your perspective?
That seems fair. Yeah, you've got to give the public or potentially affected people the opportunity to comment on the amendment being made to your plan. And if that's bringing in new flood hazard extents or potentially even shrinking them, there's two sides of the coin there. Yeah, you've got to go through some sort of public consultation exercise and Schedule 1 type processes do provide for that.
And so you'd see the external maps, as discussed with Kainga Ora, as not having that robustness.
Again, those external maps that are in the hazard information portal, that's there for information.
One of the things, and perhaps it's just to complete in terms of consideration of the decision, one of the comments made yesterday was one of the reasons for taking the Kainga Ora perspective was it shouldn't be a case of doing as we've always done. Do you have a perspective on that?
Sorry, could you just repeat that question again?
So speaking to Kainga Ora yesterday, one of the comments was reasoning for changing to the Kainga Ora option was the comment was made, we shouldn't do what we shouldn't always do what we've always done. That was the comment. Do you have any perspective on that?
By all means, we shouldn't necessarily jump to carry on doing what we've always done. That's what Section 32 evaluations ought to put front and centre. Say, is the status quo still the most appropriate approach here? Or is there another approach? In our evidence in the Regional Council submission, it's not quite locking in the status quo from the operative district plan, but suggesting actually there's a further enhancement here, an opportunity to build in two slightly subtly different zones, Zone 1 and Flood Zone 2, and applying a slightly different regulatory response in Zone 1 compared to Zone 2, rather than having a one-size-fits-all regulatory set of instruments in one single type of flood zone. To simply turf out the flood zone mapping from your district plan, that could have been another option. But I wouldn't think that that would pass the Section 32 evaluation tests.
Thank you. It helps very much.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't think there are any further questions for you, so thank you for your patience and waiting for your turn on the stage, so to speak.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.
With that, would you like to, you're on next. Welcome to sit up. We have Akuma Lime. Thank you. We've read your pre-circulated statement of evidence. I don't know if you listened in at all to yesterday's opening remarks from the reporting planners, but the only references to Akuma Lime's mentioned the planners haven't changed their position on submission, so no news there. I might introduce the panel because we know Claire, but I don't think we know you.
No, you haven't met. This is Helen Top from Hartema Line. And this is Roger Whiffen, who's the Director at Strategy Planning.
All right, yeah.
So I've brought Helen along, so she's going to introduce obviously Hartema Line for you, so you know the two quarries and get a bit of context for them.
All right.
And I brought Roger along because he's been working with Hartema Line for a while. He's doing training for them. And he can just describe some of the, I guess, the risks of reduced sensitivity from the provision to the two quarries. And my role here is for the technical planning aspect of the proposed district plan provisions and kind of what we're trying to get on those. So that's why we've got additional people here today.
Okay, so I'll do some introductions. There's Jesse Williams, who's been organising everything from Commissioner Lovell, Belinda Lovell to my left, Commissioner Tim Atkins, and Commissioner Kate Taylor here. We do have apologies from Roger Marker, who's unwell at the moment, so can't attend today's hearing or yesterday's. And of course, the reporting plan is at the back, who no doubt knows. So welcome, and as I said, the floor is all yours. You're happy for us to ask questions after the 2 points that we've got.
Well, sort of done my introductions with Helen and Roger, so I will give it over to Helen to kind of just give a bit of context about quarries. If you like, is in the submission, when done submission number 98, there's pictures of the 2 quarries. Here they are.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you. And thank you very much for the opportunity to present our case to you. It's not very often that we get to present. We just quietly go about our business, and so just a wonderful opportunity to explain to you what we do. So I'm going to talk in pretty easy language and leave the technical stuff to Claire and Roger. Hatema is a 90-year-old company, 90 years old this year. And we operate 3 quarries, 2 in Central Hawke's Bay and 1 down Central Hawke's Bay ones that we're talking about. It's 4 generations of our family been operating in Central Hawke's Bay. We arrived 70 years ago to main site at, I'll call it Hatema, but it's actually on Marikeke Road. And at Waipawa, we started that business up 65 years ago. So we're no overnight people. We've been here a long time. 4 generations. I've got my granddaughter now. She's 17. She puts on her steel cap boots and her high vis vest, and she's got her full license, and she's off learning to drive heavy machine. It's a wonderful opportunity. We're very proud of it. Now, between the 2 quarries at Waipawa and at Hatema, we quarry and we produce and dispatch and manufacture about 120,000 tonnes of product. So there's quite a lot involved in that. We employ about 40 staff on a paid basis. They're mostly locals, and they're mostly men, of course, but we're trying to change that. And many of them come to us without any skill set, any qualifications. And what we have to do is try and work out where we can best utilize their skills, how we can train them, how we can make something pretty special out of every single person. And out of 40 staff, there's probably 3/4 of them who are under training, learning of some kind of thing that's relative to their department. For example, our territory managers, our salespeople, that are learning about nutrient budgeting. You've got invariably men who have never passed anything in their school, school at 15 and didn't do any higher education. But they're all learning how to operate machinery. They're learning about risk management. They're learning about all on NZQ standards for the extractive and the mining industry. So it's a unique business, a really unique business, and we operate under the auspices of WorkSafe New Zealand, and they have a special unit called the High Hazard Unit. That was a result of everything that was relative to mining or extractive became a high hazard industry, and we operate under that, which gives us extraordinary conditions that we have to work with. So each site has to have a B grade quarry manager. A B grade quarry manager means 3 years of study, and then they have to be assessed by a panel of their peers. That's usually a 2 or 3 hour, pretty intimidating review for someone who's probably never even had their full license for very long. And then they have to apply for their certificate of competency. Now, the pass rate of them is only about 60%. So when they do pass that, they then have to have 20 hours every year of continuing professional development. This is the only industry outside of your nursing, your health services, your lawyers, your accountants who have to have professional development, what the quarry industry does. We cannot operate without the highly skilled and highly activated and focused people. We just cannot operate legally. We have to have. So we put a lot of effort into training and a lot of effort into retaining them as well. I mean, they get headhunted, everybody. So we have an enormous investment, not just in plant and machinery and land and buildings, it's investment into people as well. So it takes a lot of effort on our part. Now, our problem, and I spoke to council, what was that, 3 years ago, sometime, was that our Maharikiki Road property, we're now operating off our, what we call our new resource, 35 hectare property. And before we, what we call open it up, when we first get the machinery and start to extract the limestone out of the quarry, that's called opening up our quarry. So before we did that last year, I went around to the neighbours. I just made them aware of, okay, next week the machines are starting to move in. Just if you've got any problems, talk to me. And they didn't have a clue what I was talking about. And I said, "It's a quarry opposite your front door." And they said, "We don't know that." And I said, "We should have known that because, you know, your lawyers would have done research on it." But yet we did. And the lawyers on the LIM report, everything, there was nothing about a quarry opposite our front door. This is not good. So this is our big problem then. And since then, this was 3 years ago, nothing's changed, but we've worked really well with our neighbours. We've kept communicating, we've been operating. We're probably only able to quarry about 6 or 7 months of the year. So it's not a full year-round operation. But in the heat of the summer, the days are long and the limestone there is drying beautifully with the northerly winds and the sun there and the long hot days. So we're probably quarrying for maybe 8, 9, 10 hours a day. We try and keep it to 6 hours a day, 5.5. So we've been working with the neighbours, but our concern is that there's been subdivisions coming along there. And it's the urban sprawl, you know, we can't shift our business. We have to be where the resources are. So we're very fortunate with this resources on the East Coast because there's nothing on the West Coast at all. And so that urban sprawl is coming out and there's 3, 4 subdivisions all along this road and they are totally unaware of our business. While they might not be impacted by dust with any prevailing wind, they will be impacted by traffic movements. Now these trucks are carting 35 tonnes every time and there's probably 100 movements going north and there's probably 100 movements going south into the mandatory and ticking. So these are big units and there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of dust generated that just can't be helped. And these people have these subdivisions and they come out for their lifestyle for peace and quiet and a lovely view of the ranges and it's like they don't expect to hear the sound of these trucks going by. Or I quite often think that the first thing they do is buy a dog or two and the first animal that gets hit by these trucks that they don't expect to see out in their environment, it creates issue and it can create a problem for us. But this is our business. We've been operating there a long time and we see the risk of what's going to happen in the future. Now, lo and behold, when we talked about this has been an ongoing thing. 6 months ago, on Christmas last year, we get notification that there's going to be a subdivision next to our Waipawa Works, which we thought was really safe, right out on Tikakino Road, miles away. There is a subdivision, a proposed subdivision, going right on our boundary at our Waipawa site. So this has now become a really, really big concern for us, because it's the dust that we can't control there. It's the noise. It'll be the noise of our plant operating. They don't operate 24 hours a day. But it's not to say that any new owner of our business might not want to do that. The plant will be crushing you. It's the sound of that guy. There's machinery working, and I don't know if you've been around contractors, but by law, every machinery that goes backwards has to go beep, 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 beep. And that drives people crazy. It really does, if you're not used to it. So this is all going to happen right on the boundary of this proposed subdivision. So not only do lifestylists don't expect to have a weaning and the sound of calves being weaned and deer and roaring stags and that sort of thing, they're now going to be having to put up with the sound of our operations. And I'm not sure that this is that tenable for us. So as a council, you know, you're guardians of this resource. And we have to work with this, and we're an existing operation for all these years. And we're very, very proud of what we do, but we see the potential risk now for our business. And what is likely to happen here. Through no action of ours, we're just minding our own business and just looking after resources. We're changing on us drastically, and we need your help.
Thank you. Any questions?
Just a quick one, more curiosity, the Waipawa site, where is that going, up behind you? Or
Right up behind us.
What division you mean?
I've got some information
Okay.
that I can put in front of you. And the purpose for that is just to provide as evidence of, well, actually, if I launch into what I was going to say now, if there was another question, I've got that information to show you.
Right.
But if there's any other questions, round that out and I'll cover that off in my response.
Just the broad one. So you're operating both quarry sites.
Correct.
And they're both got the same sort of future in mind in terms of that one's not going to have a shorter life than the other one.
Well, yes, there are, but yes, potentially. The one at Hartuma, we're now on a new 35-hectare property. It's 24 million tonnes of lime there. There's probably about 60 or 70 years of resource there. The Waipawa one, however, will probably have about 10, 12 years life left in it. It's a smaller, much smaller scale.
I was going to ask another question, but I think you might tell that. I just have to wait till that.
I'll just wait.
Okay.
Yep. Hey, Alan. My question relates around the ownership. The Tops are recognised as great employers and owners of that business. There's no question about that. You mentioned, I wrote down, we don't operate 24 hours a day, but any new owner might not be the same. So thinking 60, 70 years, whatever, of the life of that Maharakiki quarry. Is this something where it's future proofing the business, not necessarily, the right to be there in perpetuity for the business, that for any new owner, that sort of, it both worries me, and that the Tops do what that the business is a good business now that maybe won't be as,
Well, I can't talk.
no, is it, but it's, my question is just, how do we protect those people from something that may get worse as time goes on? How,
So I think the first thing that should have happened is that anyone buying into those, the people that signed the consent for that Maharangi Road property, two of them hearing, so they're new owners. So they weren't aware of it. Our big thing is that they should be aware of it. We don't have any restrictions on our business at the moment. We don't have any restrictions. We just quite capable of operating very successfully within ours that we put on ourselves. As I say, we don't, it's the quarry mainly that is has the impact, and we probably only quarry as a thing. 8 months of the year. We can't, like, the weather was like, we just can't do that. What I would like to see is that every one of those people who are neighbours and buying it into their property should be aware that there is a quarry along there. Local people who are buying it from properties along Maharangi Road, they probably are aware of it. But you can't assume that it's always going to be local people, and you can't assume that people know. You're going to have to kind of assume that there are outsiders coming in that do not know the area very well, cheap land, and they get an awful shock. And so what we would like is for whoever is buying property along there to be aware, whether it's an overlay on the plan maps, thank you. Something like that, that gives them access to that information so they can make informed decisions about whether they go ahead with their purchase or whether they back off or whatever. That's all we want. That's what we consider to be fair.
I think I can also help with that. The Maharangi Road quarry has resource consent, so those environmental parameters and how it operates would have to be within the resource consent.
Yeah.
And whatever conditions are on the consent. So someone new coming into it, say the Tops did sell, then they would operate under the same resource consent.
yes, if they wanted to go
That's what
24
you're
hours,
asking.
that's a consent. Yeah, I did not phrase the question well. I'm having that problem this week. Thank you.
No, just a couple of follow-ups. Just in the two quarries operate very similarly. They both have the same machinery and
Yes.
crushing and everything.
Yes.
So, but you can see the Maharangi one, quite obviously when you drive past it, but you can't see the other ones easily.
No. And it's a rare deposit, both of them, just follow the same Waipawa one to Maharangi. It's a rare deposit. We don't blast. There's no blast. That's very important. It's a soft deposit. We just go through the motors with motor scrapes and just pick it up. That's what makes it so absolutely unique, is that you do not have to blast. We just go through and pick it up.
With the visual aspect, so you might have picked this up already, but with the Maharangi Road one, obviously there's like this image here on this submission. The southern half has been built, and it's the northern part that is
On the other side of the railway line.
Yeah. And so it's that extent that I Tops are most concerned that people don't know the full extent of the authority.
Always have a topo map in front of me.
This highlighted area, the 35, I'm not visually, I'm visually impaired when it comes to picking an area. Is that the 35 hectares or is that bigger or smaller than that? Is that all of that new area?
It's all of that new areas, the 35.
And the other question, which I was going to ask Claire a little later on, is about there's that 400-meter setback distance plan uses for rural industry and things. Is that an appropriate setback for quarry operations? You think that's the zone of notification, if you like? for neighbours? Is that the extent which you'd reasonably expect neighbours to know that what's happening?
So is that the rule in the general rule of going for new residential?
Yeah, yeah. There's a 400 metre sort of trigger point for it's reverse sensitivity kind of trigger point. But I'm just thinking, is that the trigger point for the quarries that the quarry operation seems would be appropriate?
I actually haven't looked at that. Something I'll need to look at. I just been focused on the subdivision provisions, but the only thing I noted was that if a rural subdivision was done next to or near the quarries, there isn't a specific assessment criteria about sensitivity because a larger rural lot. So the argument is that the houses can be positioned away from established activities that might need to be avoided. But that distance from the boundaries, I think, is minimum is 15 metres. So whether that was enough, if a large lot rural subdivision around here, it's just, yeah, but I'd need to look at that 400-metre distance, with how that kicked in. And are the quarries rural industry or are they existing primary production activity? It's working through how that worked.
Thank you. No, I'll hand over to Roger.
Thank you. My involvement with the Top family and Hatuna Lime started at least 10 years ago. And I assisted with obtaining the resource consent for the expansion of the northern side of the railway line at Harakiki. And that was processed as a non-notified application, and as Helen has alluded, we obtained written approval from adjacent property owners. I've also been involved with a number of other quarry expansions and operations in Hawke's Bay, Webster's Line on Middle Road. And of concern to the operators over time has always been that risk of encroachment from lifestyle subdivision and the differentiation and amenity expectations and outcomes. People don't really know what it's like living adjacent to a limestone quarry. And the fact of the matter is that limestone, regardless of there being provisions in a regional plan saying you must manage your dust on site. I don't know if you know what it's like working with limestone dust, but you can't keep that stuff on site on a good day. There's no way it can be moved. And these are extractive industries that have been there for a long time. I think we need to recognise that encroachment, whilst we could have provisions in place to try and manage some of these things, the actual practicalities are that we cannot and we have to manage them to the levels that may be expected by someone new to an area. In terms of the just going to the Tikakino quarry, as it's been discussed, as Helen alluded, there has been a subdivision proposed adjacent. Now, I'm not here to debate any merits of the subdivision or otherwise, but it's really quite timely in a way that this subdivision has been proposed adjacent to that quarry during the proposed plan hearings process, because it gives us an opportunity to see the reality of what could occur. Previously, we'd made some presentations on behalf of Hatuna Lime to the proposed district plan, and that was on a what-if basis. But the hills along Maharakiki Road and also hills around the back of Waipawa, they're quite desirable places for lifestyle. The new district plan has introduced controls that do allow for lifestyle subdivision in these areas, and that's part of the whole keeping it off the plains strategy and accommodating some lifestyle accommodation in these rural environments. So again, they're quite desirable, they're elevated, they look out over the plains, great views, but in some instances, we've got existing industry adjacent. Can I table these ones through these? What I've done here that's for information purposes and just to set the context of the type of concerns that we think the plan needs to address. That shows the proposed subdivision adjacent to the Waipawa quarry.
This is the former, bin. There are,
Long Rock lines.
yeah.
You know, I don't want to get into the debate about this, but we would take into account the existing use rights afforded for quarry. There was very little that, certainly in the operative plan, that prevents a subdivision like this being able to be proposed and put forward. And certainly purchases, future purchases, for example, of lot 60, may not even be aware that the quarry is just over the brow of the hill. That's on the top of the ridge there. But that doesn't mean they're not potentially affected by lime dust settling on their baby grand piano when they open the window on a spring morning. So really what, one of the things that came out of the submissions to the draft proposed plan was that council would go away and ensure that information was recorded on the property system so that at least when a limb report was done or when you looked on the GIS, information was available so people could see that yes, there is a quarrying activity either consented for the land or existing on the land. That was one of the specific undertakings that we took away from those hearings, but after various follow-ups, that action has never occurred. So we don't have a lot of confidence that the systems are in place to ensure that at least when a subdivision is applied for, all of the effects can be appropriately identified, assessed, and a decision made based on those effects. And really it's about what we're seeking in our submissions is to try have a layer of mechanisms in there that provide that assessment opportunity. We're not necessarily saying subdivision shouldn't occur. There may be instances where effects can be managed or mitigated, but without that opportunity, I think it's a high-risk situation for these industries. So there are instances in district plans where information can reside either in the online plan, which is a highly responsible tool that provide information but don't necessarily have a direct statutory rule as in a separation rule. There can be overlays. An example of that in the Hastings plan, which is a similar setup, is for intensive rural production activities whereby those activities may come and go over the years. A chicken farm or pig farm might be there. I might have a pig farm there for 15 years. When that consent is established, GIS gets updated and the council staff have a layer. It's not the public layer, but it's there. And then if that activity ceases, that's got away. So, and there are rules that relate to that right layer. So the E-plan creates an opportunity for it to be far more dynamic. Now, for quarrying activity, the level of investment and the nature of the activity over time, it's a layer will sit there a lot longer, but I believe that there needs to be the information into so that the criteria, the assessments can be undertaken to avoid further inflation. That's particularly extractive industries than what is there already. And that's really the guts of it. Again, we're working through the process for the Waipawa quarry. Not going to debate the merits of that or otherwise, but it is certainly a tangible example of the what's happening in one place in this industry.
Yeah, I'll do my
If
best.
there's any
That's right.
questions?
Did you want to ask Roger any questions or should I just quickly go through my?
If you could go through
Yeah,
yours.
I won't take long. So, we know the quarries, we know the risks. The proposed district plan is far more appropriate than the operative plan in terms of reverse sensitivity considerations for subdivisions. It's the next level, so we have very little complaint about the provisions. It's just trying to get that information on the planning maps for the quarries. So that when it comes to people looking at due diligence or licensing applications for subdivisions, they know that those quarries are there. They know those quarries. And with the New Zealand planning standards, trying to look at how an overlay for those quarries can be put on the planning maps that I think this is where the officers came to, without a specific provision and rules or assessment criteria, there can't be a correlative spatial definition in the planning maps of the quarries. So without that specific mention in the plan, there can't be something on the planning maps. I would like to, I guess, investigate that and see if whether, you know, at minimum, there should be the quarries on the planning map just as an information layer. It's not related to provision or anything, but it is there for information. And if that would be the minimum aspect from our submission that we would like to see happen in the district plan, because that would, people would know about the quarries that way, especially with subdivision applications and things like that. I guess ratcheting it up, if we couldn't just get the information layer, then we would be seeking those specific provisions as assessment matters in both the rural scale subdivision under rural 1 and Rule 5, the lifestyle subdivision assessment matters. They do have consideration of reverse sensitivity, but if we wanted specific rules for quarries, then another additional assessment matter would need to be added there so we can link it to the district planning maps. So it's really, I guess, understanding from officers, can they would they be willing to kind of change their recommendation in terms of having an information layer in the district plan for the quarries, or do they need specific provisions to get information in the plan? Yeah, that's kind of all we need, because the proposed plan has set up subdivision assessment matters to include reverse sensitivity. We don't need to, you know, go into town too much about that. It's just getting the information on the planning maps. And with the New Zealand planning standards, it's, you know, it's quite rigid, but they've surely got to be a way of getting key information that helps and fulfills all those objectives and policies about reverse sensitivity, the information tool. And so many people use district plan maps as their due diligence as a first start, and it's where people capture a lot of information. That would be our goal really for our submission and coming to you today.
Okay, thank you. Any questions?
Yeah, so that layer, we've had, we've been talking about the previous submitter, one before, we were talking about a possible cultural overlay of sites that aren't disclosed for sites of significance, the Māori in particular. We've also got, Roger mentioned the intensive primary that Hastings do. That is not public. It is at a council officer level. Is that what you that would be acceptable? That if it was a council tool, not a
yes, that would be, I guess, if it couldn't be in the district planning maps, but in a council tool, but that means that people doing due diligence still wouldn't know about the quarries unless they drove past them or saw the extent or locally knew about them. Looking to kind of scan what's going on in the area, and they jump on the district planning maps and they have a look. They're not going to know the quarries are there.
But if there was a flag or something on that,
Oh, okay.
you know, to say there's something here you need to ask. Is that
Potentially.
like as in whether it was Waihi Tapu or a quarry or
And so that the flag would tell them to bring council and inquire. Yeah, it's just really just anything to make sure people know about the quarries. So they don't get a surprise when they go to do more investigative or, you know, do a subdivision application and then realise, oh, hang on, I've got to look at, you know, what's around me and, oh, there's a quarry there. I didn't realise that was there and they're quite far down the track.
I mean, I drive past Maharakiki quarry a lot, but I've driven past the entrance to the Waipawa one, and until I saw that map, I didn't actually realise how it sat with that hill
Yeah.
on the other side. So it, you know, I can see why there's that underlying concern. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just how many complaints have you had in the last 4 to 5 years? You know, I know you've gone out to all your neighbours, current neighbours, but do you get a lot of complaints?
But then, our neighbours been there a very long time.
Yeah.
It's going to change. For example, my power site, we're just dealing with one neighbour. Suddenly we're going to be dealing with 20 different neighbours. They're all going to be filling their possibilities. We're expecting. We're preparing for it. That's why we're here.
Because I know, just an example, I've had a few complaints to me as a councillor about top dressing planes around Piko and Onga. Just don't come. Good.
In the report, just so I'm clear, at 10.3.37. That's per page 102. So, and I think you covered this, so I just wanted to be clear. So when we talk about rule sub R5, and the report officer says, well, the concerns are sufficiently covered under the consideration of what we established, expertise, etc. Yes. You that we need more.
Well, my style, those provisions do allow for consideration of reviews for subdivision. Where the issue is to try and get a specific rule that then allow for the quarries to be mapped on the permits. Have that correlation, that link, there doesn't seem to be any other way of getting the quarries to be identified. We could have a information layer on the planning maps. Sufficiently robust that people knew what's going on. It's really just understanding from anyone who's looking at the area to know that the quarries are there. And so adding another assessment matter to either R1 or R5. Really my way of trying to get that method for the spatial definition of the quarries and the planning.
Not come up with one question, but to get to the point of getting the GIS mapping with Hatuma line paper.
Why would we need to?
Just asking the question.
Do other businesses have to pay for it?
I have no idea. I'm just asking that I'm just trying to think of a way that helps the facility.
Yeah, but I thought it would have just been part of the release thought that the words quarries and the properties on them were just identified in the planning maps. It's like you
No, the business is mapped like that. That was it.
It's that important. That's all.
Can I respond? Yeah, from my experience with Hastings District Council, and I know that when GIS mapping is done on IRPs, when consents are granted, and it's on staff layers, I'm not aware of any cost going on to a person establishing an IRP to cover the cost of that GIS. I think that is
Can you just tell me the history behind this subdivision? What happened? Was it notified?
Well,
So that,
it's an ongoing process. At this point in time, the Terminal Lime has been identified as an affected party. So that's, it hasn't been all the best, so it's, in process, so it's probably not best to go too far on it. Discussion.
Is it operative plan or proposed district plan? Yeah, but just.
Under the operative plan,
Control activity, I think.
until the section 92 is responded to, we don't know whether that's actually controlled activity. Or whether it's a restricted discretionary activity. If it's a controlled activity, then council's got an obligation to grant the consent. However, well, it can still be affected, considered an affected party, it could still trigger a hearing, so that puts us still navigating our way through that, but it's because it's quite sensitive.
and I mean, you don't have to answer this question, but are there any potential expansion plans for that site?
Meaning like our one. No. I think the limestone resource goes back to exactly where the proposed subdivision is going to be, so we're pretty much locked.
My understanding, when I had a walk over that site with Cliff Top a few weeks back, it's still reasonably high, the bench, the base of the main extraction area. And Cliff was saying the potential there to take that down to river level, so there was quite a lot of life there. Usually once we not suspension and such.
I don't think I have any more questions. Any further questions?
No, mine's kind of a statement. I like when Helen said that we can't shift our business, we have to be where the resources. So how important is it to you that people know that resource is there?
That's a good question. It's really important, right? Because we like to think that our neighbours are happy. I know there's a huge disruption up in Auckland with quarries and even encroachment and businesses which do extraordinary thing to keep operating. But it's really important to us to have neighbours that we're all a community, we're a rural community. Even though we're a business, we're still part of the rural community. And it is really important to us to have neighbours that are empathetic and for us to be empathetic to what they, what their needs are as well. And we can work together as a community and support one another. If they have, for example, in our office, we've got all our staff have actually got full first aid certificates and defibrillator in our office, for example, and that's for the community. It's not just for our staff, it's for the community. It's not locked or anything, it's just for the access available for everybody. That's just the case, for example. But if anyone needs anything, they come to Hartoon. We've got workshop, we've got people named in the office, 10, 12 hours a day. We've got people everywhere. We sold our house recently, which is right next door to Quarry. It couldn't be a worse position, but Andy from Havelock North bought it actually, and they're actually got 3 generations in this beautiful home, and it's got, we put reverse sensitivity clauses, very heavy ones on it actually, because we needed to maintain our business, but it was time for us to leave. So they were happy. They bought it because it was really weird, but I understand it. They said it's a real comfort to us to know that there's a community around us. That if we get into trouble, or we need help, or we need a bit of topsoil, or we need this, it's right there. We've got this little community in line that gives us everything we need. If our internet drops or power drops, we've got people to go to immediately who can help us. So some people consider it a comfort to be next to a big business. So I'm taking a long time to answer your question.
They bought that with eyes wide open. Because they knew that's what
They knew, and that's important to us, that the people who do end up being our neighbours at any site, they know exactly what we're doing, and we work together as much as possible. As I say, it's a community. We don't want people who are antagonistic to what you do, because they're just going to make you life miserable. Really do.
Thanks.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. No more-
Sorry, we're over time.
That's all right. What were you for?
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. So we will adjourn the hearing for morning tea. I urge you to resume at 11, but that's. The only other submitter we have is the surveying company, and they're coming in person.
Thank you.
So thank you. Oh, what, when are we coming back? Yes. For 25 minutes. Quarter past?
Yeah.
Number 5 will resume from morning tea. We only have one more submitter to be heard today from surveying company. After that, we'll turn to the reporting planners for a response, an immediate response to matters arising. They've heard today and from yesterday too, if they've had any thoughts there. And then we'll adjourn the hearing on this particular topic. So Nick.
Yes, it is.
Welcome, Nick. We've seen you before.
Yes, no, you saw me at hearing 3.
Yep.
So,
Have you got any speaking notes or anything? Because sometimes we like to get a copy.
no, look, I will follow them. They'll be sent through.
Okay.
I'll email them through to Jesse at the end of this. Yeah,
Thanks.
they'll be made available. So, yeah. So,
Okay, well, the table's yours.
okay. So again, let's take in general the hearings panel. Introduce myself again. I'm Nick Wakefield. I'm from the surveying company. I'm a licensed cadastral surveyor, and we're here to present our case for proposed changes to the proposed district plan around subdivision rules and the performance standards. Again, we'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. We note that our submission points were covered off in the section 42A report subdivision in general, and they were restricted to a couple of things, a few things around rules regarding boundary adjustments and subdivisions around lifestyle lots, and then the other items that we will speak to around the subdivision standards for minimum site areas in the settlement zones and the large lot residential zones. I will start with the ruling around boundary adjustments. In our submission, we requested that the definition of boundary adjustment be amended, substituting the words records of title for the word allotment into this definition. We believe as surveyors who deal with this at the coalface, that our wording is a more accurate definition of what actually occurs in a boundary adjustment. We do know the definition has been pulled out of the national planning standards, but we can see potential issues around activity status determinations if this is the view that's taken. And so we just simply ask the panel to consider that our definition is potentially one that's better suited. An example of that may be a situation where and we come across it a lot when we facilitate boundary adjustments, but they're facilitated by amalgamation conditions because of the loan structure of various land parcels adjoining each other makes it difficult to do it as a straight one lot, two lot subdivision. And so it tends to be done with we subdivide a piece out and we amalgamate it with the other one because it's an easier transaction from a legal point of view via mortgages and consent. It's that way than it is in other avenues. And that's something we have found just by dealing with various different people over the years. So and hence why we think our definition for it is slightly better than what has been pulled out from the planning standards. The second rule that we would like to comment on was around the creation of lifestyle sites in association with a conservation lot. Now, we provided quite a bit of detail about our submission in the hearing 3 because we thought that was where it potentially should have been. And we've provided the panel with quite a in-depth amount of information, particularly around we got hold of the current rules used in the Auckland Super City, and these were all presented to the hearings panel by Brian Foote. So we won't go into this too much detail today, except to say that we believe that that you should be able to create additional lifestyle lots in association with conservation lots as the size of that conservation lot increases. The final bits that we'll talk to today are the minimum site areas in the settlement zone and in the large lot residential zone. These are substandard, so this is sub S1 for the standards. We believe that the minimum net site area of 600 square metres where public sewage reticulation is available is currently set too large for the settlement zone. We note in the office report that they have used a mean average and stated that within the Otani settlement, for instance, that mean average site, which is 1359 square metres, could be subdivided under this rule. We've gone and undertaken our own analysis, and we agree with the determination of what the mean average is. However, our point is that mean averages are highly susceptible to the influence of outliers, particularly in data sets that are small, like Otani, Parongaho, Tekapau. They're not large groups of data to pull from because they're restricted in size. And so we believe that more appropriate averages could be found using either a median or a mode average value. Now, we've actually undertaken that analysis ourselves, and we found that in all of these settlements, both the mode and the median is 1,012 square metres, or the old-fashioned quarter acre. So, and then on top of that, we've then looked at what portion of sites are then would be over 1,350 square metres, because that, in our opinion, under the current rule, 1,350 square metres is the minimum you'd need in order to be able to satisfy the requirements of the net site areas for both sites. And approximately only a third of sites in Otani, Tekapau and Parongaho could actually meet this minimum requirement. That means that for most subdivisions in these settlement areas, it'll become a discretionary activity. And if the purpose of the rule is to strike a balance between retaining the feel for the area and allowing further development, then in our opinion, it's kind of missed the mark. It's gone too far one way. And further to that, we also believe the panel must take into account section 5 of the RMA, particularly the 0.52A, and it's that one sustaining the potential of natural, in this case, more physical resources to meet the reasonably foreseeable needs of future generations. We know that there's housing shortage in New Zealand and in and around Central Hawke's Bay for various reasons, and one of the biggest barriers to providing housing is the lack of land supply around reasonable infrastructure. So we believe council has a duty of care to use this existing infrastructure where it is available to its most efficient needs, and if necessary, upgrade it if it needs to be. Rather than restricting development in these settlement zones with sanitary infrastructure available, we believe council should be instead encouraging it so that these services can be best utilised. Well, look, we accept the concerns around retaining field. These are meant to be, rural towns. But we feel that our proposed lot size at 450, it's not the smallest of smallest lot sizes, still enables that balance to be struck. And put it this way, if you set it at 450 square meters as the net site area, only sites that are over that 1,000 square meters could be subdivided. So any of those littler ones that exist in the townships of Otani will not be able to be further subdivided as they currently could. So to our, it's just a more appropriate figure. And it's for similar reasons that we don't support the minimum 800 square meter lot size in the large lot residential zone, especially where infrastructure is available. We proposed in our submission that value should be 600 square meters. And this is still a reasonably large section. 600 square meters is not small. And when we went and did some analysis of the 2 coastal settlements that have sanitary infrastructure available, so Te Parahi has a council-owned infrastructure set up, and Karaka has a private scheme, and they have multiple sites that are smaller than the current, than our proposed 600 square meters. So we wouldn't be changing the environment overly by having that slightly smaller lot size. It's in keeping with the area. It takes advantage of the fact that there is infrastructure available to deal with sanitary waste, and provides an area for potential further development for these little townships. That's essentially our position on those items, and what we'll provide for the hearings panel as part of the PDF that I'll send through to Jesse is some analysis of those median, what those values are for those median mode and mean values for those townships. And that will be all submitted to the panel for there to digest. So, I mean, that ticks off all the items that we had in our submission. Again, thank you for your time. And if you have any questions or queries, I'm willing to.
Any questions? Taylor? No. Well, you think I just I just wanted to talk to Nick about the definition of boundary adjustments.
That's certainly.
The national planning standards require that councils use those definitions.
Well, we're aware of that, so
Yeah.
it's just more of a,
So, and I was looking up the definition of allotment and it's humongous. But I'm just trying to get my head around what the difference is for your mind. Why would recorders parties be?
because there are sometimes situations where you will potentially either create or reduce a lot size depending on, there'll be natural boundaries involved, where we have no ability to, and this happens a lot in the rural situation where you potentially have a boundary adjustment that goes through where an old natural boundary ran, and in between those parcels or allotments is a wonderful thing called a hydro parcel, which is a body of land has various interesting legal definitions. And so in that situation, technically we would be in non-compliance with the rule of boundary adjustment. Now, that may not be a major deal in terms of a planner that understands what's going on with the legal ramifications of a hydro parcel and amalgamation conditions and those sorts of things. But look, we just feel that it was a better definition. And again, we are fully aware that the National Planning Standards requires that to be, and so it was just a case that we wanted to state that this was our position, and the reasons for it being that there are, especially in the rural landscape, there are interesting titles you have to deal with in terms of, like I say, hydro parcels is a classic one, ones around natural boundaries. And I could probably provide a sketch to the panel to show that's probably going to be an easier way to describe what I'm trying to say. And so we're more than willing to provide that as part of the submit at the back end. A classic one will be you've got various interesting title arrangements, be it limited title, interim title status in Hawke's Bay, Central Hawke's Bay is full of these titles that have limited definition. You have to then have convoluted amalgamation covenants and those sorts of things to make the process work. That would technically fall outside the definition of a boundary adjustment under its current setting. So, yeah, that's that in a nutshell is probably the two situations. And the thing is, like, you might think that that's not that common. We run into them.
Oh, well, that was going to be
Yeah.
my follow-up question.
Yeah, and while we might say that it's actually reasonably common for us because of the nature of the work we do rurally in Central Hawke's Bay and the nature of the, I'm not sure if, well, we have being surveys, we deal with the cadastre a lot. And so areas like Ashley Clinton and Prongaha around Wimbledon have multiple areas where the record is extremely poor to non-existent at times. And so we have to do various awkward, convoluted ways of making boundary adjustments work. And so, look, I can probably provide a plan of one. I'll see what we can find through the records and provide an example. So,
Just a question around your submission around large lot residential in the coastal area. And we acknowledge that coastal is sensitive in terms of some of the effects. Your suggestion of 600 meters squared. Are there many examples of areas where?
well, see, for instance, Karaka and Te Parahi have multiple sites that are under that 600 square metre. So what I suppose we're saying is that they're developed in that way with various sizes from 500 up to the bigger ones. And the to set it at 800 is the new standard for anything that's new, when the existing framework is quite different. It seems out of kilter with those little townships. Certainly, we don't want to create a situation where we're creating multiple little lots. That's not the point of it. But we feel that, especially the distinction between when you can create a site without sanitary infrastructure is 1,000 square metres in all but Mangakuri, then 800 square metres it's not much of an incentive to have good either private or public infrastructure for sanitary waste, which is ultimately a better solution for the environment, given that lots of septic tanks is on 1,000 square it has cumulative effects. Whereas if you've got centralised systems, they can be run generally in a much more efficient and better use way, we feel. And so again, there's already existing. The 600 square metres is not out of kilter with what's already there. We wouldn't be over intensifying those areas by suggesting that 600 is a better figure.
Thank you. All questions? Okay, well, thank you very much.
Cheers, guys. Thank you very much. And I'll get all that stuff through to you by the end of the week. And so that'll be ready and we can go from there. Again, thank you for your time. Appreciate it. Yeah, you've been a bit of a slog for you guys. So we might see you again yet. Zone.
Assuming maps.
Yes, yeah, that's more of it. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
That's your baby.
Yeah, that's our, yeah, for sure. Cool. Hey, thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Cheers.
He was going to supply some of that median mode.
He was going to supply us with that. So. Okay, we've heard from all the submitters who wish to be heard for hearing stream 5. If you want us to pause for a minute or two, or do you want to talk?
I believe I have much to say.
There's just a couple of things that's come to mind. But
Okay, just to make sure is the hearing all right, the sound, because my distance. If you could talk fairly loud, it is good. Thank you.
I feel your pain.
Yes, yes, and you're closer,
I'm closer.
I'm sure Stella might be able to tell you if it's not.
yeah.
Just, I guess, a couple of points, listening this morning. When Rato Lands Trusts. I am thinking about possible changes that I can make to one of the policies in the earthworks chapter and maybe some cross referencing. So I will look into that. And in terms of the regional council's presentation today, I thought that was useful conversation, and I think it reinforced where I landed in terms of my section of clarity. So that's safe.
Thank you, Ruby. Just to clarify for the record that you will be supplying a written reply for client. Okay, so it's good. Thank you. Okay.
I suppose it's just following immediately on from the discussion with Mr. Wakefield, the surveying company, about the definition of boundary adjustment, which as he agrees, it's set in the national planning standards and definition. However, regardless of that, even if you were to swap out the wording allotments to record of title, I don't think that would be appropriate, because you can have more than one allotment on a record of title, and so it could result in more allotments being potentially created as a boundary adjustment, which is not the intention. It's that you have the status quo. It's simply a boundary moving within the existing allotments. So that my other point really relates to the Hātuama Line quarry, Mahara Kiki quarry, and the request there for the new assessment matters and the mapping. And I'll address this in detail in my right of reply, but probably there are a couple of things that I could perhaps mention. Is that the quarry had its resource consent granted for their extension of the quarry back in 2011. And the approved plan showed the extent of the extension consented. As a condition of that consent, there was a requirement that they are to proceed in accordance with the quarry management plan that was submitted with their application. And that provides for the establishment and operation of the quarry through to the year 2100. And it includes details about the methods by which the limestone will be harvested, staging of the quarry activities through to the time of the consent, stage and extent of earthworks, extent and location of facilities to store their excavated material, route and design of conveyor system and storage of facilities underneath the railway track to the existing processing plant, because the extension goes north of the railway track from their existing quarry. So the council's assessment at that time did include an assessment of the ability of the quarry operation to avoid and mitigate dust, noise, lighting and vibration. And there's some discussion around that in the reporting officer's plan that went with that consent. On the basis that the council assessment was to allow it to proceed on the basis that it goes in accordance with the consent conditions. I'm sort of really a bit uncertain why the submitter is concerned about reverse sensitivity effects, and if it is because they're concerned about operations having unanticipated environmental effects that may result in complaints to adjoining residential activities, then my thinking is that it's not appropriate or reasonable that the owner should fall on adjoining landowners to provide a type of buffer created by restricting what they can and cannot do on the land. So the other thing of note is that in the draft district plan that was released for public consultation, Hatuma did make a submission on the draft plan. And under the draft plan, the Hatuma Lime quarry was, in that area was included within the, call it back then, the names have changed. The Plains production zone. So that would have allowed a 12 hectare minimum lot size. So in response to their submission, the proposed plan zoning was changed to general rural zone, which increases the minimum lot size to 20 hectares. So you wouldn't, as a result of that, you're not going to get the same potential intensity of smaller lots within the vicinity of Hatuma Lime.
Well, that's what I was thinking. So this subdivision wouldn't happen. Yeah. I'm just trying to figure out what the lot sizes of these. Do you happen to know what the lot sizes are roughly?
That'll be the 4,000 square.
Both quarries moved from Plains production to,
No, just the Maharakiki,
just not that one.
That was the only
Not that one, okay.
But that one is, that
That
one's
one's
not
in-
production anyway.
It's
It's on the other side of the river.
So what zone would it be in?
That's it.
So what zone is this one?
It's rural production.
So it's still covered by it would be covered by the 12 hectare.
It's the river's boundary.
It's on the other side of the river. Sorry to interrupt.
No projection on the other side of the river.
They're in general. Yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose the other point to note, just from the presentation, was that I'm referring to the Waipawa quarry and the resource consent application that's currently pending. They did say that they've been notified, and so in my opinion, that's showing that the process is working. They are being notified if there are things that are happening around them.
Hatuma Lime are being notified.
That's how they got the map.
As an affected party.
That's the only way they got that map.
I think their concern was the
What's
other way around.
It's
The other way around.
It's the other way around.
People buying this lot in the subdivision might not know they're there.
Yes. And I know, referring to the applicant, they have said sort of their bottom line is that if they could at least have an information layer on the plan to inform people. If people want to do due diligence. I suppose the question I have is, well, people may know, but it may not provide them with it may not prevent future complaints coming from future landowners or existing landowners, even if they know about the quarry, particularly if, for example, the quarry may not operate within the conditions of their consent. It may not give them the full amount of protection, it's information only.
So can you just clarify for me, sorry? So you think that would be a possibility to include?
Well,
I'm not entirely sure. Mr. Whiffen referred to the Hastings District Council situation. I do wonder if he was referring to that on the GIS system, you can put a layer on that will show, there's information there about what existing consents are on properties. So you, at least if you're searching the council information system, it'll flag that there's a resource consent for a particular thing. You'll have to still go to council to get the full consent to know what it's about, but it helps you to identify that. I mean, something like that could be helpful to this situation. And it would benefit everyone, not just Ātumilai. But that sort of sits outside the district planning that situation. That's just within the wider GIS mapping that's available for use by the public as well as. Yeah, I guess too, the question of whether Ātumilai should be specifically identified on the district plan maps. I mean, if you offered that to them, there are other industries and quarries. I don't know about quarries, but certainly other industries in the rural zone or in the district that may also want to be identified. I mean, how far do you go, I suppose, is the question.
I suppose those industries haven't specifically asked in this process. If they wanted it subsequently, they'd have to go through the normal processes to do so. So we can really only concentrate on what Ātumilai is at this stage, and not ignoring the precedent, but consider that.
It would. That's probably as much as I can say. So it's this, I suppose, there's questions pondering there as well.
Okay. Are there any matters arising from yesterday's hearing? Anyone wants to comment on further? Really, anyway?
No, really, for me.
And there's nothing further from me.
Okay, thank you. So we will issue a minute following this hearing that sets out directions for the right to reply. Also, what information we're expecting to receive from the submitters that we've heard. A few things I can think of top of my head. And any other matters apparent to us. So thank you for your efforts and energy. Appreciate it. So having said that, we will adjourn this hearing for today, and hearing stream number 6 will be meeting in November. I'm just trying to remember the dates at the moment. Thank you, and with that, the hearing is adjourned.